Get ready, folks, because on September 22nd, 2025, India is launching one of its biggest economic shakeups in years, GST 2.0. We're talking about a massive overhaul of the entire tax system, and trust me, it's designed to affect everything from your weekly grocery bill to the next car you buy.
So that immediately brings up the big question, right? Why go through all this trouble? Why is India deciding to basically tear down and rebuild its entire tax system right now? Well, it all comes down to solving a problem that's been a headache for businesses and consumers for a very long time.
And the solution is all about one core idea: radical simplification. The whole point of GST 2.0 is to get away from a super confusing, multi-layered tax structure and move to something that's just, well, simpler and more intuitive for everybody.
Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty, because this is the heart of the change. The old system had four main tax slabs: 5, 12, 18, and 28%. And honestly, it created a ton of confusion. Businesses were constantly trying to figure out which category their product fell into. GST 2.0 just scraps all that. It collapses everything into just two main rates: a simple 5% for essentials and a standard 18% for most other things. Plus, there's a new 40% rate specifically for luxury items and so-called sin goods.
And here's where you can see what that actually looks like in the real world. I mean, the impact is pretty clear, right? Essential food items go from 5% all the way down to 0. That's a big deal. Household goods, a huge drop from 18% to just 5%. And even major purchases like small cars and TVs fall from that super high 28% rate down to the standard 18%. This is where the reform really hits home for millions and millions of people.
So let's get right to the part you've probably been waiting for. What does all of this actually mean for your wallet? This is the most practical part of the change, the stuff that's going to directly affect the prices you pay every single day.
First up, let's talk about the stuff you use every day. Things like soap, toothpaste, hair oil. They're getting a massive tax cut. We're talking about a drop from 18% all the way down to just 5%. That's a really significant saving when you think about your monthly budget.
And yep, your grocery bill should be getting a little bit lighter too. Basic staples, things like milk and paneer, are now going to be completely exempt from GST, zero tax. And other packaged foods like butter, ghee, and different sauces will now be taxed at that lower 5% rate.
And it's not just the small stuff either. We're talking big-ticket items. Things like small cars, televisions, and air conditioners, which used to be in that highest 28% bracket, are now dropping to the standard 18% rate. That can make them a lot more accessible for many families.
But of course, there's no free lunch. To pay for all of these cuts, the money has to come from somewhere. And that's where this new 40% slab comes into play. Luxury items, think high-end cars, yachts, and sin goods like sugary drinks and eventually tobacco, they're going to see a pretty significant tax hike. But this whole thing isn't just about consumer prices. Let's zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture, because these changes are also strategically designed to give a major boost to key sectors that are absolutely vital for India's economic growth.
And one of the most important impacts here is on healthcare. This is a huge one. 33 essential, life-saving drugs will now have zero GST. Critical medications for cancer and rare diseases are also becoming tax-free. Even insurance policies are moving to that lower 5% rate, which should make healthcare just a bit more accessible for millions.
The reform also has its sights set on two other absolutely critical areas. For agriculture, taxes on essentials for farmers like fertilizers and machinery are getting slashed to 5%. That's a huge helping hand for the rural economy. And to help push for clean energy, solar equipment and other renewable devices are also getting a tax cut, from 12% down to 5%.
But look, a reform this massive is also a huge economic gamble. There's no getting around it. The government is basically making a big bet here, following a strategy of taking some short-term pain for what they hope will be a much, much bigger long-term gain.
So what is this short-term pain I'm talking about? Well, it comes down to this massive number. The government expects to lose somewhere between 45,000 and 93,000 crore rupees in tax revenue in the first year alone. That's a huge hit to the budget. And it's happening simply because way more items are moving into lower tax brackets than are moving into higher ones.
So what's the big bet? Well, it's a pretty classic economic idea. The government believes that by making things cheaper, people will buy more stuff.
This boost in consumer demand will get the economy buzzing, it'll bring more businesses into the formal tax system, and over time, that bigger, more active economy will generate more total tax revenue, hopefully making up for that initial loss and then some.
Of course, it's one thing to have a great plan on paper. It's a completely different challenge to make it actually work in the real world. There are some pretty significant hurdles on the road ahead to make sure this new system actually works for everyone.
A huge piece of the puzzle is simply making life easier for businesses to operate. So the reform is also bringing in things like quick registration for new companies, automated refunds to improve cash flow for exporters, and a new tribunal to settle tax disputes faster. The goal here is simple: cut the red tape and make it easier to do business in India.
But here's where the rubber really meets the road. There are two huge challenges. First, you have to make sure that when the government cuts a tax, businesses actually pass that saving on to you, the consumer, by lowering their prices. And second, there's the massive task of helping smaller businesses, especially in rural areas, adapt to the new digital systems they'll need to use to file their taxes.
So there you have it. GST 2.0 is bringing a radically simpler tax system. It promises lower prices on everyday goods, a big boost for key industries, and an easier environment for businesses. All the pieces are being put in place. But the big question remains, will it all come together to deliver on its ultimate promise of a stronger, more prosperous economy for everyone?
Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more such videos.